Hey, good weekend to you. Welcome to The Leading Edge. I'm Jerry Anderson. It's another hot weekend, continuing a hot summer. We told you just a few days ago that we had seen, and felt, more 90-degree days this summer than we have in the previous 4 summers combined. And we're only halfway through July. So I look at the calendar, and I look at the thermometer, and I think, it's time. So we're beginning a weekly look at the now annual threat to our drinking water supply posed by the green cloud of algae lurking in the western basin of Lake Erie, from where hundreds of thousands of Toledoans and Toledo water customers get their drinking water. So first, we're going to be talking with University of Toledo professor and avid lake watcher, water tester, algae chaser, Dr. Tom Bridgeman via Skype from where the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, lovingly called NOAA, gave us an algae bloom update this week. And also joining me in studio, this is Andy McClure. He is the administrator of the Collins Park Water Treatment Plant right here in Toledo. So, Dr. Bridgeman, I'm going to start with you over your way there in Put-in-Bay. We'll leave drawing any conclusions to later on, but what shape is western Lake Erie in here in mid-July?
Hi, Jerry. Hi, Andy. Well, today Lake Erie's in pretty good shape. In mid-July, we were out around the island, and the water is clear. There's a little bit of cyanobacteria or blue-green algae in the water, but nothing to be concerned about. A little bit more than we normally see at this time in July, but nothing too much right now.
All right, and we need to make clear that algae is kind of a blanket term. There are a lot of forms of algae. This is cyanobacteria. That has been our nemesis out there. It is earlier this year than usual. We think, Tom Bridgeman, that's because of the heat of this summer. But, Doctor, does the earliness of the cyanobacteria, does that necessarily portend any more serious problems later on in the summer, say August?
No, the earliness of the bloom doesn't really have anything to do with how big the bloom is going to get. The lake warmed up about a week and a half faster than it normally does, and so we're seeing things happen a little earlier. But the bloom is fueled by the nutrients that come in through the Maumee River and other tributaries, and so the bloom is going to get as big as it will be predicted to get come August, and the fact that it's a little bit earlier doesn't really make that much difference.
So we're not going to lose sleep over the earliness of the bloom. I do want to specify on the size of the bloom. We know historically, Dr. Tom, that doesn't necessarily portend a water crisis either. In fact, we've had bigger blooms in other years than we did during the year of the crisis, August of 2014, correct? How does this year's shape up compared to the biggest ones we've seen?
That's correct. This bloom, in terms of overall size, will be large, but not as large as what we saw in last year or 2011 or some of the other big years. It'll be about the same size as the bloom of 2014, but so far we're not seeing near the toxicity that we saw in 2014. And by the time the bloom reaches its maximum size, we don't know where it will be. It could all be blown over to Canada. So there's no real parallels to 2014 at this time.
All right, Dr. Tom Bridgeman, why don't you stand by there? He's joining us from over there where NOAA came out with its HAB forecast, that is harmful algal bloom forecast. He's over at Put-in-Bay. Andy McClure in studio with us. When you hear, this happens every year, this time of year, when you hear the kind of talk that we're talking about, does that stuff keep you up at night?
Some nights more than others.
Yeah.
I know Tom was talking about some of the heavier, the years with bigger algae blooms, and I know the bloom was to the east of us. This would be 2 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago. The bloom was actually well to the east of us, but there was a northeast wind blowing across the lake, and I get a phone call from Tom and some of the other guys with buoys on the lake, and they said, Andy, watch your intake crib, because of the bloom. It was all actually east of us, but the wind blew it right back over our intake crib, and we stayed up at night, and we're watching the pH change and some of the other parameters change, but that ended up being, there was algae in that, but there was no microcystin in it. So, but yeah, we're in touch with each other. And
how ready is the plant?
The plant's very ready. We've been ready for a couple months now.
All right. Without the changes made in the wake of 2014, and we made significant changes in 2014, without those changes, in your opinion, Andy, would we have had another water crisis in the ensuing years?
No, based on what was coming into the plant, we would not have.
Even without those improvements?
Even without those improvements, the lake conditions, you know, we had the perfect storm back in 2014, and there has been a little bit of presence in the lake, but I don't think we would have. No.
Okay. Have we made changes? I know there are ongoing changes as they were investing, we've heard it on this program here, hundreds of millions of dollars over at Collins Park. Some of that is expansion of capacity, sizable expansion of capacity. But in terms of the treatment of the water to fight the algal problem, the cyanobacteria, if you will, have we made improvements, for example, this year over last?
We're better practiced with the use of the equipment, and we have a better idea how to use them within our process. But we haven't built any new improvements specifically for algae. That was all done within that first 9 months after August of 2014.
The most significant, you correct me, you put them in order, but one of them had to be early warning.
Yeah, early warning, getting those buoys out in the water is the biggest one, because we know what's happening in the lake right now, so we can adjust our chemical treatment, adjust our treatment process more quickly and address the problem sooner.
Okay, early warning, early treatment then is connected. It follows right in line there.
So the most important improvement was quadrupling our powdered activated carbon feed capabilities. Powdered activated carbon is something that's in, it's in a Brita filter, for instance, or any filter that's carbon in there. So we're adding it right to the water. The powdered activated carbon, it's easy to remove later in the process, but it absorbs, not just microcystin, but it's absorbing taste and odor compounds, because we've been feeding the carbon since the 60s. We started feeding the 60s for taste and odor control. We just quadruple the capacity. So with that capacity, it's able to absorb the microcystin, and we can turn it up a lot sooner.
Let's see if we can get Tom Bridgeman back here. What variables will you now be watching most closely? What would tell you that we're headed for potential problems?
Well, the biggest variable is always weather. And the forecast for weather for July is going to be mild and not too rainy. But some large storms with large rain events in July could bump the bloom up a little bit larger than predicted. If it doesn't rain at all through July, the bloom could end up being a little bit less than predicted.
Doctor, you know what feeds the algae that lives out there in the water. And you've been out there for the past several years. Are you seeing any noticeable, tangible effects of efforts to cut down on nutrients, phosphorus, for example, or nothing yet?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that question, because that was some of what the presentations today at Woodland Bay were about. That would show up in the tributary flows, the concentrations of nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus in the tributary flows. And right now, so far, there's no discernible difference in what's coming down the tributaries. And it was pointed out that it's really going to take a few years before you could expect to see a real difference. Even, for example, Grand Lake St. Mary's, where they put in very stringent measures, it took several years before they started to see improvements in Grand Lake St. Mary's. So the Maumee River and Western Lake Erie, I think it's a little bit too early to expect improvement, even if agriculture is doing everything it can right now.
Okay. Back in studio with Andy McClure, administrator over the Collins Park Water Treatment Plant. Still hanging out there, the use of, and I've heard a couple of different things. Ozone treatment for water purification. I've heard ultraviolet treatment for water purification. Do we have any of those in place, or are they coming online?
The ozonation project is actually out for bid right now, and that's part of our capital improvement plan recommended by a Blue Ribbon panel that we convened after August of 2014. It's part of the capital improvement plan, and it is the one that is really focused on microcystin.
And that would really target, this particular situation. For those who follow the city's water quality dashboard online, at what point on that little meter, Andy, should people get worried?
I'm going to defer that one till just a little bit later.
All right. You're not going to defer this one. Yeah. Will Toledo have a water crisis in 2018?
I don't believe Toledo's going to have a water crisis. We're on top of it.
You are left, when you think about it, you're stuck with whatever comes in the tube, right?
Yes.
Whatever comes down the pipe. You're left to deal with the mess made by others. How frustrating is it when we see so little substantive movements in efforts to close the faucet of nutrients that are feeding Lake Erie algae?
I try and keep my focus on running the water plant and making sure that we're doing our job really well. Yeah, it is a little frustrating to see that, but I know it's going to be, there's so many factors that go into it. It's going to take a lot of efforts and a lot of cooperation amongst a lot of people to take care of it. But my primary focus is just make sure we've got that plant running and we're treating the water well for everybody.
Try to sleep well.
Thank you.
We're ready. You tell me we're ready.
We're absolutely ready.
Andy McClure, Dr. Tom Bridgeman over there at Put-in Bay. We're ready, and thank you for keeping us, alerted as to where we are right now in the ever-changing situation out there regarding algae, cyanobacteria in the western basin of Lake Erie. Thanks to you both, and we're going to be right back.